everyone. Today we're opening up a new chapter in our class. We're transitioning not only to Descartes' Meditations, thus a new text, we're also transitioning to a new set of topics. If you think back to the first full lecture I gave for the class where I was talking about the question, what is philosophy? You may recall that there I mentioned underneath the heading of contemporary conceptions of philosophy, three distinct philosophical domains of research. One of these domains was metaphysics, otherwise called the theory of reality. The other is epistemology, otherwise known as the theory of knowledge. Up to this point in our class, we've been focused on issues related to ethics and political philosophy. But what I want to do today is turn our attention to the other two domains, the theory of knowledge and the theory of reality. As we'll find, the treatment of theories of knowledge and theories of reality in the history of Western philosophy are closely intertwined. They are even in Plato to a certain extent, as we'll see in a lecture that will, when we look at Plato on this later on. And we'll see even more so how this is evident in Descartes' treatment of it. But, the rough and ready idea as to why theory of knowledge and theory of reality are so closely intertwined can be pretty easily ascertained, right? The idea is that all that the only access that we have to reality is through knowledge. And thus, if we're going to know anything about reality, if we're going to be able to do metaphysics, then we're going to have to utilize our cognitive capacities to acquire knowledge. And thus, it seems in order to have a well-grounded theory of reality, we also need to have a well-grounded theory of knowledge. So it looks like, at least at first glance, that metaphysics might presuppose epistemology. Now, that's not the only way of seeing things, but that's certainly the way of seeing things that Descartes is here promoting, at least to a certain extent, right? The idea is that if we're going to have a firm theory of reality, that is, if we're going to have a firm science, then we also need to have a firm understanding of how to use our cognitive capacities, that is, how to use our capacities to come to know. So today I want to try to give you, in our lecture Turning to Metaphysics and Epistemology, an overview, first of all, of who Descartes is, of what his goals are in this text that we're reading, the Meditations, and a little bit about the style of the text. And after that, I will then turn to a careful analysis of the content of the first meditation in the text, the Meditations, which is effectively the first chapter of the book. We'll work our way carefully through the key concepts of that chapter and through the results that Descartes takes himself to have established there. Okay, so buckle yourselves in. We're going to be going quick. So first I want to talk about what is Descartes up to in the book, the Meditations. The basic goal is very simple. What Descartes wants to do is establish new foundations for the sciences. Descartes lived at a time from 1596 to 1650 where the world of science was transitioning away from a view of the universe that had been established more or less well since basically the turn of the for almost 1400 years by that time, right? And what was happening is that a lot of these long-held beliefs about the nature of reality were being overturned. For instance, one thing that was discovered at around this time, as you may know, from the scientific work of Galileo, as well as from the mathematical speculation from Kepler, is that we discovered that the Earth is not the center of the universe. Up to this point, based on our best scientific data, people had believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, that it was surrounded by everything else that existed, and that everything in the universe went around the Earth. But what we discovered is that this is actually not true, right? As I said, Kepler, or Copernicus was, sorry, I should have said Copernicus, not Kepler, but anyway, Copernicus was the mathematician who gave us the model to try to understand how the observations we have of the stars, which seem to all go around us, how those are to be explicated in such a way that we aren't at a fixed center. And then Galileo was the first one to actually prove this through the use of telescopes, right? So at this time, we discovered we weren't the center of the universe. A pretty big shift in our understanding of reality, if you ask me. We were also discovering things, aside from large-scale discoveries about the universe, we were also making discoveries about the physical universe itself. So, for instance, we were discovering facts about gravity, for instance, were discovered at around this time. New natural forces were being discovered along with this. Physics was becoming more and more mathematical. So along with Newton's discovery of gravity, which is what most people think about when they think of Sir Isaac Newton, Newton also developed a thoroughgoing mathematical physics. He articulated a theory of the universe that could be mathematically expressed and specified. Now, this is a way of thinking about the universe that we take for granted today, and we have a hard time understanding how anyone could not think of the universe in this way. But before this time, before the time that Descartes was alive, it was very commonplace for people not to think about the physical universe in mathematically precise terms. So there too, we have this massive change occurring. We also have changes in mathematics that are occurring. For instance, calculus. Maybe you were tortured taking that class in high school. Calculus was developed at around this time. Here again, Sir Isaac Newton is a key part of that development. And we were also making discoveries about the nature of the human body. So, for instance, a doctor named William Harvey, a British doctor, discovered at around this time what the heart does. Before Harvey, the common belief was that the function of the heart was to heat the blood, and that the function of the brain was to cool the blood. And what Harvey discovered is that the heart actually has nothing to do with heating the blood. Rather, the heart is just an organic pump. So he was the first one to discover what the heart does, that the heart is in fact a pump. So all these changes are going on in the sciences. The sciences are being shaken to their very core, right, with insights about the place of human beings in the entire universe with Copernicus, about the nature of physical and natural forces in the universe with Newton, and even new insights into the kinds of beings that we are with doctors like William Harvey. Okay, so there were lots of developments going on in the sciences, and this caused many people to begin to doubt that science could be trusted. Right? If science can undergo such massive changes, if we can shift from thinking one way to the other, from thinking one thing is true to the other thing is true, then how can we know that anything is true, right? Before, back when we were living in the pre-Copernican universe, just looking at the skies, it looked as if we were at the center of everything and that everything was moving around us, right? It seemed like the sun would make a journey across our sky every day from the east to the west. But then we discovered that our senses are not very reliable sources of evidence with regard to things that are very far away, like the sun. So if we can't trust our senses there, why should we trust them anywhere? Where can we find evidence that is actually trustworthy to the fullest extent, the kind of evidence that we want when we're doing science, right? This is the question that's guiding Descartes in the Meditations. He wants to find beliefs that are absolutely certain. He wants to find a set of beliefs that cannot be doubted, no matter what. Because he believes that if he can do that, he will thereby also discover the foundations for all future scientific research. This will be the foundations of our metaphysics, the basic building blocks of our theory of reality or our metaphysics. Okay? So, to put it all in a nutshell, just what this first section is all about here, Descartes is trying to find beliefs that are absolutely certain. Absolutely certain beliefs will be the foundations of the new sciences. And on these foundations, Descartes believes, we can then enjoy a kind of progress in science that will be unshakable. Now, that's the overarching goal of the meditations. But in pursuing this overarching goal, Descartes also has a few like sub goals, right? Things that he achieves along the way to establishing this larger overarching goal. And we will talk about these subsidiary goals throughout the course of our discussion, but I just want to point out right now that our discussion is largely going to focus on the overarching goal of achieving absolute certainty. Okay, but these are some of the smaller, more subsidiary goals that he thinks he needs to address along the way to articulating our absolutely certain beliefs that can constitute the foundations of all of our knowledge of the universe. So, the first of these subsidiary goals is a defense of a view that in the literature is often called substance dualism. So, substance dualism is basically a theory about the nature of the mind and the nature of the body. So, substance dualism maintains that the mind is a distinct substance from the body. And this means that the mind can exist independently of the body and vice versa. So Descartes defends a substance dualist view about the nature of the human mind. This is a defense that we get in meditation too, after we've already discovered how we can achieve absolutely certain beliefs. This comes up as one of the key doctrines that needs to be articulated in connection with this new conception of knowledge. And we'll see how those two are connected when we get there. The second belief that Descartes defends is a belief in monotheism, where monotheism is the idea that there is one and only one God, that this God exists, and the God is an all-knowing, all-powerful, and perfectly good being. That's the basic doctrine of the monotheism that Descartes defends. And here again, Descartes defends this view as a part of his overarching project of trying to find new foundations for the sciences. This defense comes up in Meditations 3 and 4. We'll see how they're connected when we get there. The final view that he defends is the view of mathematical physics, right? It's basically a defense of the kind of physics that we assume today, right? And the assumption of mathematical physics is that the material world is, as it is described, basically in Newtonian mechanics. That is, it is perfectly and completely describable in terms of precise mathematical theory. Right? So everything we can know about the physical world can be expressed in mathematical formulae and with the precision of mathematical demonstration. Right? Okay. So why are these important for Descartes' goals? I'll just give you a general idea as to why this is. So for substance dualism, one thing that it establishes that's very important is the idea that the science of nature, the science of, I guess I should say physical nature here, let me make that correction, will be different from the sciences of the mind. In other words, the kinds of methods that we employ in investigating nature will be different from the kinds of methods we employ in investigating the mind. The second import of the second key subsidiary goal of monotheism is that this will actually help directly ground the claim that certain parts of human knowledge, in particular the part that is to be the part of the sciences, is absolute and objective, right? So there's a role, in other words, that that God will play in guaranteeing our knowledge for us, and we'll investigate this quite carefully when we turn to Meditation 4, in particular, what role the existence of God and the goodness of God plays in grounding our knowledge claims in science. It's interesting to note, like, the reason Descartes' talking about arguments for the existence of God is not to convert anyone, right? That's not his goal. His goal is instead to show how the existence of God is a necessary precondition of scientific knowledge. It's an interesting use of the arguments, and we'll talk more about that when we get there. The relevance of mathematical physics is the most obviously relevant part of this, because of course what we identify science with is physics, right? For the most part, or at least fundamentally, physics is a key part of our scientific knowledge of the world. And so proving that mathematical physics is the appropriate way to do physics is clearly relevant to what he wants to do, and articulating a new set of beliefs for the fundamental presuppositions of science. And I've already said a little bit about where he establishes these points. Meditations 1 and 2, we could understand as focusing primarily on establishing substance dualism, because substance dualism comes in as a presupposition of our understanding of what a absolutely certain belief is. Meditations 3 and 4, they focus on much more than just monotheism, as we'll see, but it is a key part of the discussion because, as I said, Descartes believes that if we're going to have absolutely certain beliefs, then God must be the guarantee of those absolutely certain beliefs. And Meditations 5 and 6, which, by the way, is a section of the book we're not going to read, what Meditations 5 and 6 do is they build on the results of Meditations 1 and 2 and Meditations 3 and 4, in order to demonstrate the truth of the mathematical conception of nature. All right, let's shift gears and think a little bit about the literary style of the Meditations. It's obviously very different from what we encountered in Plato. Plato wrote dialogues. These are very much like plays, right, that can be performed on a stage. The Meditations, however, doesn't have the structure of a play. It can't be performed on a stage. And so you might wonder, well, what kind of text is this? It's not a play. It's also not an argumentative essay like what you might have been taught to write in high school in order to take the state test and ace it. Rather, it is a series of meditations, so it lives up to the name that Descartes gave to it. But what does it mean for something to be a series of meditations? Well, think of it as like a diary. Think of it as like a personal journal where the author is writing on the page an inner monologue that's going through their minds. What this means is that when you read the text, you need to be basically trying to put yourself in the place of the author that's writing this text, right? To read a series of meditations is not to read a report of someone else's life. It is rather to try to take the position of the person who's writing it, the position of the meditator themselves, in order to think these thoughts for yourself, right? So you can think of the meditations as something like a training manual, right? Where it's putting you through a series of cognitive exercises so that you can learn how to use your mind properly in a scientific manner, right? So it's not just a diary that you're reading. It's a series of meditations that you yourself are supposed to participate in. Now, this would have been clear to Descartes' readers because Descartes himself was a practicing Catholic, right? He lived at a time in France when Catholicism was the dominant religion. Also, a kind of Catholic philosophy was the dominant philosophy. It was what was taught in the schools around France, and it was what Descartes learned growing up, okay? Now, the reason that's relevant is because in this era, there was a very popular book that was written by a Catholic priest named Saint Ignatius of Loyola. He is the founder of the Jesuit order. If you're familiar at all with the Catholic world, Jesuit priests ultimately stem from the order of priests that Ignatius founded at this time. And the book Spiritual Exercises, written by Ignatius, was basically the first book of its kind. It was a kind of spiritual devotional book, right? Now, if you know anything about spiritual devotional books, you don't read them like they are simply reports of something or other. You also don't read them like they are stories telling you about something or other. Rather, spiritual books are meant to be read in a kind of participatory manner, where if there's a prayer written on the page of your devotional book, you're not just supposed to read the prayer, you're supposed to pray the prayer in reading it. Right? Whenever you encounter a bit of scripture in these devotional books, you're not just supposed to read the scripture, but you're supposed to grapple with the scripture with the context given that you get it in the devotional book, right? So you're participating with what the author is doing in the text in reading the text. Similarly, you're supposed to read the meditations as something that you yourself are participating in, where you're not reading just what Descartes is thinking or on this occasion, but you are actually thinking the thoughts for yourselves. So it's important as you're working through this text to try to get yourself in a situation where you understand the back and forth that Descartes constantly goes through. This is something else you're going to have to get used to, and we'll look at some examples of this in the discussion section, actually. It's commonplace for Descartes in the period of one paragraph to say one thing and then turn around and seem to say the opposite of it, and then turn around and seem to give a reason against what he just said. Because what he's doing is he's working through an idea, right? He's thinking it through. And what you, the reader, are supposed to be doing is thinking through this idea with him. So you have to read the text more carefully, more slowly, and more deliberately than you would just a magazine article or an article in a scientific journal, for instance. Here again, I strongly suggest reading the text first very quickly so you get a sense of what the entire chapter is, and then going back and reading through it again more carefully. I find that's usually the best way to go about reading a text like this. Okay. So now let's turn to what Descartes is up to in Meditation 1, in the opening chapter of this text. So what Descartes is basically presenting in Meditation 1 is something that's often called the method of doubt. So note, it's a method. It's not a set of doctrines. It's not a set of claims about what is true. It's rather it's a method. It's a way of doing something. And what the method of doubt what the method of doubt tries to enable us to do is basically to discover beliefs that are absolutely certain. So the way that this is supposed to work is basically that we utilize the method of doubt in order to doubt our beliefs. And what the hope is that by doubting our beliefs methodically, carefully, right, observing step by step how the doubt is progressing, that we will uncover a belief that cannot be doubted, right? So it proceeds by a kind of method of elimination. And I try to give you a quick, just like overview of what the overarching goal of the method of doubt is here, right? The goal is to consider beliefs, to try to reasonably doubt them in a methodical way, right, where we're following a set of instructions and not doing it haphazardly, in order to see if the belief can be doubted. If the belief can be doubted, then Descartes believes it's not a belief that can be part of the foundations of science, right? Because remember, as I said earlier, Descartes believes that a belief that can be part of the foundations of science is a belief that cannot be doubted. Okay, always keep that equation in mind. The belief that's part of the foundations of science is a belief that cannot be doubted. So the method of doubt is meant to uncover beliefs that cannot be doubted, and thus to sort of like unearth the foundations of the sciences from amongst the rubble of beliefs that can be doubted. The beliefs that he found himself surrounded by in his school at the time of the turn of the 17th century, with all these old scientific beliefs being proved false. So that's the basic idea of it, right? The method of doubt is a way of methodically doubting our beliefs in order to try to discover beliefs that cannot be doubted ultimately. But meditation 1, if you've read it all the way through, you know that meditation 1 does not yield in and of itself any beliefs that can't be absolutely doubted. In fact, meditation 1 leaves us in doubt with regard to, at least apparently with regard to, all of our beliefs, right? So meditation 1 actually executes the method of doubt to the place where it seems like we have to doubt all of our beliefs, right? So this is a pretty extreme position that Descartes leaves us in meditation 1. So meditation 1, we have to think of primarily as just the presentation of the method of doubt and the execution of the method of doubt. So we're being sort of presented with the method and taught how to use the method and actually performing the method on our own beliefs all together in meditation 1. Okay? So my goal in what follows, let's see, let me get a sense of how I do this again. Okay, my goal in what follows is to teach you about two different things. So there's sort of two different things we have to get in mind here. Let me pause the video real quick and try to type this into these notes, because I think it would be better if I made this more explicit right up front. So just hold on a minute. Okay, so as I was saying, it's important to keep in mind here two things, or to keep two things distinct in thinking about the method of doubt in general. The first is what we might call the ultimate goal of the method of doubt. The ultimate goal of the method of doubt is to uncover absolutely certain beliefs, that is, beliefs that cannot be doubted. Okay, that's its goal. The way that it does this, however, is by attempting to doubt all of our beliefs and, hopefully, coming across some that cannot be subject to doubt. So the goal is to uncover absolutely certain beliefs, but it might not seem like that. It might seem like Descartes is some sort of skeptic, because all he does in meditation 1 is simply doubt our beliefs. But his goal is not just to propagate doubt, right? He's not a skeptic in that regard. He's rather using the method of skepticism in order to ultimately fight back against skepticism by showing that skepticism, even when we carry it out to its ultimate end, doesn't eliminate all of our beliefs. Or at least that's his hope that he has in meditation 1. Now, keep in mind that we don't discover any beliefs that are absolutely certain while using the method of doubt until the very beginning of meditation 2. So you're going to have to wait until meditation 2 to see what this absolutely certain belief is that we uncover. Okay? So keep that in mind. Now, aside from a discussion of the ultimate goal of the method of doubt and the general strategy behind the method of doubt, namely a kind of strategy of a process of elimination, Descartes also applies the method of doubt in meditation 1 in 3 distinct stages. So what I'm going to do in this next section, in these following sections, right, basically from here up until the end, is I'm going to talk about the 3 stages of doubt, that is, the 3 applications of the method that Descartes makes in meditation 1, and in doing that try to elucidate more carefully what the method of doubt itself is, right? Thus far we've talked about the goal of the method of doubt, we've talked about the general strategy of the method of doubt, but I haven't given you the step-by-step characterization of the method itself, right? It's kind of like, think about it on analogy with me describing a dance, right? I can tell you that the tango is a dance that's meant to bring people pleasure, and I can say that it attempts to bring people pleasure by, making them move their bodies in certain ways. Thinking about this in relation to the method of doubt, right, that's sort of all I've told you about the method of doubt. I've told you what its goal is, and I've told you in general how it achieves it, right? But if I tell you just that much about the tango, right, that it's a dance that brings pleasure, that's its goal, and it brings pleasure by having you move your body in a certain way, I have not yet described to you what the tango is. I need to describe it step by step, right? Similarly, I have not yet up to this point described what the method of doubt is. I need instead to go through it step by step in order to show it to you. And that's what I'm going to start to do right here, right? So starting with C underneath section 4, this is where I'm going to start to describe the method itself in detail. And I'm going to do that by also talking about the applications of the method that Descartes makes in Meditation 1. Okay, so let me first talk about the 3 applications of the method that Descartes makes, and this will be our way of sort of getting a grip on what the method itself is. So the 3 applications of the method are given names in much of the literature on Descartes today. Many commentators call the first stage of doubt in Meditation 1 the sense doubt. They call the second stage of doubt, or the second application of the method of doubt, they call that the dream doubt. And they call the third stage of doubt, or the third application of the method, the evil demon doubt. And the evil demon doubt is the one that Descartes ultimately becomes satisfied with. And I want to try to show you why he finds that the most satisfying application of the method for his purposes. Now, one thing to know about each application of the method of doubt, or each stage of doubt in Meditation 1, is that each stage is characterized by a distinctive, what I'll call skeptical hypothesis, right? So we can think of each stage as distinguished from the others by rallying a distinctive skeptical hypothesis. Okay, well, what is a skeptical hypothesis? A skeptical hypothesis is a possibility that, if it were actual, would undermine the reasons that support the purported knowledge claim and thus disqualify it as a bit of knowledge. You should, here again, pause and memorize that definition that I just gave. A skeptical hypothesis is a possibility that, if it were actual, would undermine the reasons that support the purported knowledge claim that we're trying to doubt, and thus disqualify it as a bit of knowledge. I'll go through in more detail and more concretely what I mean by a skeptical hypothesis here in a moment. But for now, let me emphasize again, you should memorize that. It'll be very helpful to you, okay? The goal in each stage of doubt, or in each application of the method of doubt that Descartes pulls off in Meditation 1, is to evaluate how, if at all, the skeptical hypothesis that's characteristic of that stage undermines the purported knower's reasons for her belief, and to see how, if at all, one can rebut the hypothesis itself. Okay? And the overarching goal in Meditation 1 is, as I just said, to formulate a skeptical hypothesis that is so powerful that it undermines all the reasons that we could possibly bring to support our knowledge. Okay? So this is sort of like how the method of doubt is being applied in each stage, right? We have a skeptical hypothesis. The goal of the skeptical hypothesis is to give us reasons basically to doubt our beliefs, to, in particular, to help us to see how our reasons for our beliefs can be undermined. And the goal in each stage is to evaluate how powerful this hypothesis is, and how many of our beliefs it actually undermines, as well as to see if the hypothesis itself could be rebutted in any way. Okay. Okay, so I know that description is very abstract, but I'm going to try to, I wanted to give you the abstract characterization first before I turn to how, to applications of this abstract characterization of the method in what follows. Hopefully you'll be able to see it in what follows. Let me also say this, that the skeptical hypotheses that Descartes rallies do not attempt, right? So this is really crucial, and Descartes himself actually talks about this. Hold on. Where did I? Oh, I went too far down. Sorry. Okay, sorry. The skeptical hypothesis do not attempt to undermine each belief that we have individually. You may have remembered at the beginning of Meditation 1, on the very first page, Descartes says he wants to set out to doubt all of his beliefs, but this seems kind of hard because there's no way he could doubt each and every one of his beliefs individually. He simply has too many beliefs to doubt in that fashion, right? Just sit back and think about all the beliefs that you have right now, right? Like just consider all the things that you can see in the room around you, and consider all the beliefs that you have about the things you can see in the room around you. For example, I can see that there's a coffee cup here, so I have a belief that there's a coffee cup here. I can feel that the coffee is cold and the cup is cold, so I have a belief about the coffee cup that it's cold. I have a belief that this coffee cup has black and white imprinted on the outside of it, right? I can see that there's coffee inside the cup, and so I have a belief that there's coffee inside the cup, right? And I could just keep going on and on and on about this distinctive cup without even considering all the other things that I can see in the room around me. So it seems like I have literally an infinite number of beliefs, or at least if they're not infinite, I have no idea how many there are, right? And in any case, given how many it seems I have, it seems there's really no way that I could ever go through and doubt each one of them individually. So how does Descartes propose we address this issue of the overabundance of beliefs? Well, he thinks that what we should do is, instead of doubting each belief individually, we should doubt them in bunches. We should doubt them in groups. And we should put them together in groups according to the sources of reasons that we have for endorsing them as true, right? So, I mean, think about it like this. This is something I'll talk about a little bit more at the beginning of the next lecture. But a belief is basically an idea that you have that you take to be a true idea. Okay? So right now I believe that there's a coffee cup on the table before me. This is an idea that I have. But it's not merely an idea. It's an idea that I have that I also take to be true. Now, when you take something to be true and you endorse it as true, you do this for reasons, right? Every belief has reasons that support it. So, for instance, if you asked me, why do you believe there's a coffee cup on the table, Dr. Kidd? I would say something like, well, because I can see it. So the perception, the visual experience that I have of the coffee cup here functions as my reason for my belief that there's a coffee cup before me, right? So so my perception is itself the source of my belief. It's the source of my reason for my belief. And I can thus group together my belief about the coffee cup and my belief about the microphone that's on the table and my belief about my pen that's sitting on my keyboard, right? I can group all of these beliefs together by virtue of the fact that they're all things that I believe because they are based on my perception of these things, because they have reasons that derive from my sense experience of the world. So, I can group them together as all being beliefs whose source is perception. Now, each stage of doubt targets a distinctive source of reasons. Okay, that's the key way to think about it. Each stage of doubt targets and attempts to undermine the reliability of a distinctive source of reasons for belief. Stage 1, in particular, targets the perceptual experience of things that are very small and seen far away, right? Like your perception of the sun, the moon, the stars, or of things that are very tiny, like what you might see under a microscope, for instance. He tries to target our beliefs that derive from perceptual experiences of that sort. Stage 2 has a wider scope. Stage 2 targets not just perceptions of things seen far away or that are very small, but it targets perception as a whole. And stage 3 targets both perception and thought. And the key reason why Descartes likes stage 3 as the end result of the method of doubt, as being basically the skeptical hypothesis that he's going to work with henceforth, is because it seems to undermine all of our beliefs, right? Like, think about it. Everything that you believe, at least according to Descartes, will have its ultimate reasons either in your perceptual experience or in your thought. For instance, I have beliefs about what the inside of my apartment looks like. And all of these beliefs derive from my seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling the inside of my apartment, right? In fact, a great deal of my beliefs about the natural world derive ultimately from perception, from sense experience, right? But it's also the case that there are beliefs we have that don't derive from sense experience. For instance, I know that it's necessarily true that 2 plus 3 equals 5. And that's something that I didn't learn from simply seeing sets of 2 things and sets of 3 things and putting them together. That's something that I learned through thought, right? Or at least that's what Descartes is going to argue, right? So if all that we have as sources of knowledge, or sources of reasons for belief, is thought and perception, then if the third stage undermines both of these, then it seems like it undermines all of our beliefs. And so it's the kind of doubt that would be suitable for this method of uncovering beliefs that simply cannot be doubted. Okay? That's the rough and ready reason why Descartes likes stage 3. Now, let's get more concrete. Okay? Thus far, I've been describing the method of doubt in very abstract terms. Let me try to describe it very concretely. Okay? So here's the way the concrete execution of the method of doubt would go. Right? Suppose that you are riding on the D train, right? Maybe you'll get to do that again someday soon to make a trip to City College, right? You're riding on the D train, and you know where the D train goes into 59th Street and then like shoots up the west side of Manhattan to 125th Street, you know? Suppose you're on the D train going uptown and you get trapped next to some guy who happens to be a skeptic. And he starts up with you the following conversation, right? Let's suppose the skeptic first asks you, hey, what do you know? And then you, being, a nice New Yorker, say, well, I know that we just passed 72nd Street. So let's say you just launched out of the 59th Street station, you're traveling down the tunnel, and then you see 72nd Street station, and you're like, okay, skeptic, we just passed 72nd Street. This is the knowledge claim, right? This is what you claim to know. So the skeptic then asks for your reason for what you claim to know. You say that you know we just passed 72nd Street. The skeptic then asks for your reason. So, how do you know that you just passed 72nd Street? You then respond with your reason for your belief. You respond, in other words, with the thing that you think proves that your belief is true. And in this case, the reason is very simple. You could say something like, well, because I can see that we've just passed 72nd Street, or something like, I can see the 72nd Street sign right there out the window, right? Well, not anymore, it just passed, but you know what I mean, right? But then the skeptic's not going to stop, because here's where things get interesting for the skeptic and, for our purposes, executing the method of doubt. What the skeptic is going to do is then ask after why we rely on that source of reasons. Notice the source of our reason, in this case, the source of why we believe, right? In other words, D is the source of our reason, B is the reason, right? The source of our reason is then being questioned by the skeptic here. So the skeptic's going to say, well, how do you know that your eyes aren't deceiving you? You're saying that the reason you believe we've just passed 72nd Street is because of something your eyes are telling you. But how do you know right now that your eyes aren't deceiving you? And this is a kind of a peculiar question, right? It's not the kind of question that usually comes up throughout the course of everyday living. In fact, it only comes up in those rare circumstances where we seem to have some reason to doubt our beliefs, our senses, like if we go to a magic show, or if we're in a fun house, or if we just dropped acid or something like that and we're tripping, right? Then we might be like, well, how do I know my eyes are really telling me that there are pink rats running across my desk, right? Not saying that actually happens to me or anything like that, but you know what I mean. So, in other words, what's being questioned here ultimately is not just our reasons for our beliefs, right? Namely, our sense experiences or whatever, but it's ultimately the source of our reasons for our belief that's being questioned. Remember, that's how Descartes is going to group beliefs together. He isn't ultimately interested, in other words, with your knowledge that we just passed 72nd Street. That's an individual belief. That's not really what's at issue in the method of doubt. What is at issue, rather, is the sources of our beliefs, right? So that we can take care of whole swaths of beliefs all at once. So, again, let's go through and name each of these different parts of the conversation. So notice that B is the belief, or the we could also call this a we could call it a purported knowledge claim. This is the belief or the purported knowledge claim. C is the request for the reason or justification given by the skeptic. D is then the reason for it, right? Notice if your sentence starts with because, right, that's often an indication that what you're about to give is some sort of reason or explanation of something, right? And E is the skeptical challenge, right? But how do you know that your eyes aren't deceiving you in this case? In other words, how do you know that the source of your reason is a reliable source? This is the skeptical challenge, right? That's sort of characterizing the entire stage. And then what we need to give ultimately is a response to this skeptical challenge. In other words, what we need to do is to try to show why, at least in the case of the first stage of doubt, we need to somehow try to prove why we trust our senses in our everyday knowledge claims. Like whenever you say, hey, we just passed 72nd Street. How do you know that? Well, because I saw it. Well, how do you know that you saw it? How do you know that your eyes weren't deceiving you? Again, that's a question that doesn't often come up. But when we're doing science and when we're trying to achieve absolute certainty, we have to answer that question. That question must be answered if we are going to be absolutely certain in our beliefs that derive from sense experience. In other words, if we're really going to be scientists, we have to understand why our tools are reliable. Where if our tools are our senses, if that's one of the tools we have to gain knowledge of the world, we have to understand why our senses are reliable tools, why they're reliable means to acquiring truth about the world. Okay, so that's the challenge that's being posed in the first stage of doubt. It's important to note something right up front here that'll come up again when we look at the third stage of doubt here in a minute. And that is that, as I say here, the skeptic in this conversation that we just looked at, you can look back at it yourself, right? Notice, the skeptic never asserts anything. All of the skeptic sentences end with question marks. So the skeptic never commits themselves to anything. The only person that does assert something, the only person that does say, hey, this is true, is you, the purported knower, right? So it's important to notice that the skeptic has no beliefs to defend in this method. Only you do. Only the purported knower does. The skeptical challenge is basically challenging the strength of your belief by forcing you to articulate the other beliefs that you have that support the initial belief you gave, right? So the idea is something like, if you claim to know that we just passed 72nd Street, then you must know what your reasons are. And if you claim to know we just passed 72nd Street on the basis of some reason, then you must know that that reason is a reliable reason, right? And so the skeptic is basically asking you, how do you know that reason is reliable? How do you know that reason is trustworthy? Okay? And again, this is a question that we don't often ask ourselves in everyday life, but it is a question that we must ask ourselves if we are ever to acquire scientific knowledge of the world. We must have absolute certainty. At least that's Descartes' overarching presupposition. Okay. Let's see here. So we can sort of characterize... but let me point something else out here about the first stage of doubt. The first stage of doubt has a skeptical hypothesis that is... did I put the hypothesis in here? Here, hold on a second. Let me pause this and make a modification to the notes. Okay, I've changed the notes a little bit to accommodate what I think is really important to say here. So the kinds of beliefs, as I said earlier, that are subject to doubt by the hypothesis of the sense doubt, of this stage of doubt, are beliefs about things that are seen far away and things that are really tiny. I think we can generalize it to other different kinds of things. And we can do this by characterizing the skeptical hypothesis that this stage of doubt is based upon as follows. And I call it the sense doubt. So this doubt is basically our senses deceive us with regard to things seen in non-standard circumstances. For example, when seen very far away, or when they're very small, or when they're moving by very quickly, or seen in bad lighting conditions, right? It's also important to note that, again, just to re-emphasize this, that the skeptic is putting this hypothesis forward as a possibility. That's why it's a hypothesis. It's a possibility and not as an actuality. But it's a possibility that, if it's actually the case, would undermine our trust in our reasons. That would undermine our reasons for the belief in question, right? Now, one thing that's interesting about the first stage of doubt is that the skeptical hypothesis is not a very powerful doubt. It doesn't undermine very many of our beliefs at all. In fact, many of our beliefs that we derive from sense experience can be, I think, held on to in the face of this doubt. So think about if the conversation with the skeptic proceeded in the following way. Suppose, just to go back in the notes a little bit further, suppose that after he asked, but how do you know that your eyes aren't deceiving you just now, after you've claimed, because I can see we just passed 72nd Street, suppose you went on to say something like, well, look, I know that my eyes aren't deceiving me just now because I can now see that we're passing 84th Street. And also I can hear that the conductor just made an announcement over the intercom that we just passed 72nd Street and are headed to even further up, right? In other words, what you can do in order to save the reliability of your senses is you can confirm the testimony of one of your senses with the testimony of another sense, right? So let's change the example a little bit to try to illustrate this. Suppose I say, as my purported knowledge claim, there's a coffee cup in my office. The skeptic asks, how do you know that? Asking for my reason for my knowledge claim. I then say, I know that because I can see the coffee cup. Then the skeptic goes after the source of that reason, namely my visual experience. And he asks, well, how do you know that you see the coffee cup right now? How do you know that your eyes aren't deceiving you right now? Well, to answer that, I can say, well, I trust my eyes are not deceiving me right now because I can also feel the coffee cup. And the coffee cup was not something that I could feel unless the coffee cup is actually there, just like my eyes are telling me it is. I can also smell the coffee cup. And of course, the coffee cup wouldn't have that smell if it weren't actually there, just like my eyes are telling me it's actually there, right? So we can have what we might call corroborating evidence that's given from the other senses, which shows that my eyes are functioning normally and properly in this current circumstance, right? Which then gives me reason to defend the reliability of my visual experience that I was relying upon in the first instance in conversation with the skeptic, right? Now, there are, of course, scenarios where I won't trust my eyes if I can't get corroborating evidence, right? So suppose that I'm like poor Macbeth in Shakespeare's play Macbeth, and I'm in kind of like a mad fit after murdering someone. And suppose that I see in the distance the dagger that I killed that person with hanging in the air. And I say something like, lo, is that a dagger there? Right, a famous scene from the play Macbeth. And suppose that I really want to try to figure this out. So I go up there and I try to grab it, and my hand just passes right through the dagger. I try to touch it, I can't feel anything. I try to smell it, I can't smell anything. So here, my senses are not corroborating what my eyes are telling me. And so that seems to give me reason to doubt the reliability of my eyes in this scenario, right? So all that to illustrate that the first stage of doubt is pretty easily rebutted. It's pretty easily answered, right? So notice what we just did with this first stage of doubt, right? We considered a knowledge claim. We considered the reason we have for the knowledge claim. We then considered a skeptical hypothesis that challenges the reliability of the source of my reason. And then I try to rebut the hypothesis. And for stage one, we're pretty successful at rebutting the hypothesis, at least as a general claim about the reliability of our senses in general. Okay? Now, it's because that stage one's hypothesis fails in this manner that Descartes then moves on to stage two. Stage two has a different skeptical hypothesis. The skeptical hypothesis is basically this: we cannot tell the difference between dreaming and waking life. These two are indiscriminable from the first person point of view, as we might say. In other words, what Descartes notices is that many of the sense experiences that I have in waking life, like the experience of sitting here while looking at my coffee cup, I could also have in a vivid dream. Notice a vivid dream where I don't realize that I'm dreaming, okay? So in other words, what it's like for you to see a coffee cup in real life is exactly like what it's like for you to see a coffee cup when you dream. At least that's what the hypothesis claims. Now, if that hypothesis is correct, if it's actual, that we can't tell the difference between dreaming and waking life, then for any minute of our waking lives where we're having conscious experiences, that could, for all we know, actually be an experience in our dreaming lives, right? So the upshot of this is pretty obvious, right? Like, take it back to one way to see the upshot, I think, is to take it back to the conversation with the skeptic on the train. So suppose after I claim I know we passed 72nd Street, and after I claim that I know this because I saw the 72nd Street sign just flash by. Suppose that instead of the skeptic asking, well, how do you know that your eyes aren't deceiving you right now? He instead asks, how do you know that you aren't actually dreaming right now? Now, to answer this question, I can't simply say, well, because what my eyes are telling me is corroborated by what my hands are telling me, by what my ears are telling me, by what my nose is telling me. Because in the same way that I can not tell the difference between dreaming and waking life in vision, I also can't tell the difference between dreaming and waking life in smell or in audition or in touch, right? The same things that I can touch, the same experiences I can have when touching the table while awake are also experiences I can have while touching the table when asleep. So it seems like I can't take the same tactic in defending the reliability of my eyes as I did in responding to the first stage of doubt. Now, Descartes thinks that this is good enough, right? That this is good enough to cast doubt on all of our beliefs that derive from our senses, right? And so what he does is, the result is he says, okay, now what we need to do is take all of our beliefs based on sense experience and set them aside as if they are false, right? Because they can be doubted. Now notice, Descartes is not saying that they actually are false. He's rather saying what we need to do in following the method of doubt is, after we come up with a doubt that seems to undermine the reliability of our beliefs, that doesn't mean that we can then just throw them out as false and then no longer believe them. That's not the claim. Rather, he wants to say is, because they can be doubted, they can't be admitted in science because they're not absolutely certain. Sure, they might be certain enough for everyday life. They might be certain enough for you to get around in your practical life. But whenever we're doing science, we don't settle with practice. What we settle with is certainty. And so if we're going to utilize a belief, if we're going to endorse a belief in the context of science, we have to be absolutely certain about it. And since we can't be absolutely certain about our beliefs derived from our senses, when we do science, we're going to have to set all of those beliefs aside. So that's the first major result of meditation 1 that we get in the second application of the method of doubt comes in stage 2. Now, I know I went through that really quickly, but I hope to unpack it a little bit more in discussion section. Okay, so please bring some questions from this section to class today. Now let's go to the third stage of doubt. The third stage of doubt is the most powerful stage of the 3. As I said, it undermines the reliability of our reasons that derive not only from perception, but also from thought. Okay, so how does it do this? Well, the easiest way to see how it does it is to consider the skeptical hypothesis that's being formulated. Okay, so how does the evil deceiver doubt achieve this goal of undermining the reliability of both sense perception and thought as sources of belief? Well, take a look at the hypothesis here. The skeptical hypothesis of the third stage of doubt, of the evil deceiver doubt, is as follows: that there is an all-powerful, all-knowing deceiver who deceives us with regard to all of our beliefs. Notice it's a whole lot like the dream doubt, in the sense that if we can't tell the difference between dreaming and waking life, then we need to think of our senses as sort of like things that just deceive us with regard to all of our beliefs derived from the senses. But what this doubt does is it says, okay, not only is it the case that our senses deceive us because we can't tell the difference between dreaming and waking, we also can't tell the difference between a true thought and a false thought. We can't tell the difference between a good argument that leads us to the truth and a bad argument that leads us away from the truth, right? And it actually tries to hang this possibility on the head of a specific kind of being, namely an all-powerful evil deceiver. The hypothesis could also be formulated without postulating an evil deceiver, and Descartes actually nods in this direction in Meditation 1, where he points out that, if you believe that the source of our minds is actually from nature, then you could see that perhaps nature itself could be this kind of deceiver, only perhaps it's not intentionally doing it. It's just sort of doing it by accident, right? But in any case, I mean, another way we could think about this kind of scenario is to think about the scenario that we found ourselves in whenever in the movie The Matrix. Sorry, I disappeared there for a second. I'm back. In the movie The Matrix, right? If you've seen this film, you know that this kind of scenario seems very much like the kind of evil deceiver scenario that Descartes is mentioning here. Now, I don't want to talk about The Matrix because I know some of us haven't seen it, and I don't want to ruin it for anyone. But you should watch the film. It's really fun, and it might be a good film to watch while you're taking a break before writing your next short writing assignment. In any case, if there is an all-powerful and all-knowing deceiver who deceives us with regard to all of our beliefs, then it seems like we would then have no recourse either to our senses or to our thoughts to try to defend the sources of our beliefs, right? And so, what Descartes does basically is he says, okay, look, what was left over in stage 2 of the dream doubt, here to just backtrack a little bit to something I skipped over, right, is that the dream doubt undermines all of our beliefs based on sense experience. That's right, because we can't say, oh, well, my eyes are telling it to me, my hands are telling it to me, therefore what my eyes are telling me must be correct because my hands are corroborating what my eyes are telling me. We can't do that because I can have all of these sense experiences while dreaming. But what Descartes points out is that there are certain things that we can know even while dreaming, and these are truths of mathematics and geometry. While dreaming, that you can know that 2 and 2 make 4, right? You could, in theory, do all of your math homework in dreams, right? Of course, you couldn't write down your math homework in a dream, so that's kind of makes it a useless enterprise, at least so far as getting the grade is concerned. But you can do math in your sleep, right? You can also do geometry in your sleep, right? You can imagine triangles. You can produce proofs about triangles while you're sleeping. So what Descartes thinks this shows is that the truth of mathematics and geometry don't rely on our senses at all. The truth of 2 and 2 equaling 4 does not rely upon anything that your eyes tell you. It rather relies on something that thought tells you. Okay? Now, I know this is a very abstract point, and I'm going to try to make it clearer to us in discussion, so please bring questions about that to the discussion. But this motivates then the turn to the stronger evil deceiver doubt in stage 3. Because what we get in stage 3 is this doubt that even our thought is reliable. Right? So if neither our senses are reliable sources of reasons for belief, if our senses deceive us, and if our thought is not a reliable source of reasons for belief, if our thought deceives us, then it seems like we have here motive to set aside all of our beliefs. In other words, it looks like all of our beliefs are subject to doubt. And this is why Descartes settles with stage 3, to put it very concretely. Right? Now, just a parting note. Many people at stage 3 want to object to the skeptic in the following way. They want to say, well, skeptic, this hypothesis that there's an all-powerful, all-knowing, evil deceiver who deceives us all the time is very entertaining. But guess what? There is no all-powerful deceiver. So you can just chill out, right? That's an objection that's often raised against the third stage of doubt. The problem, though, is that this objection does not help. Because we have to remember, right, go back to the idea of what a skeptical hypothesis is. And go back to the concrete understanding of what's going on in the conversation between you and the skeptic. In this, the skeptic is never postulating something that he takes or she takes to be true. They're rather asking you how you know it's not true. So the hypothesis of the third stage isn't manifesting itself in the form of the skeptic saying, oh no, there's an evil deceiver, you can't believe anything. Rather, it's the skeptic doing this. Well, how do you know that there isn't this all-powerful deceiver? You claim to know that we just passed 72nd Street. You claim to know that on the basis of sense experience. But your senses will be reliable only if there really isn't an evil deceiver deceiving you all the time. So what that means is that you must be assuming all the time that there isn't this all-powerful evil deceiver. And how do you know that? How do you know that assumption is a good assumption? How do you know that assumption is true? So the burden of proof isn't on the side of the skeptic. It's on you. He sees you as assuming that there is no all-powerful deceiver, and he wants to know, what are your reasons behind that belief? Unless you can give reason for that belief, unless you can show that that belief is true, that there really is no all-powerful deceiver, then you will not have sufficient reason behind your belief to admit them into science. Because all of your beliefs can be doubted. All of your beliefs can be doubted as the products of some all-powerful deceiver. Now, again, the skeptic isn't asserting that there is an all-powerful deceiver. He's rather asserting that you assume there is not one. And he wants to know how you know that. Okay. I hope that was helpful. Explication of Descartes' views. Please bring questions to discussion today. There's a lot here to discuss. I'll try my best to bring questions to you to try to bring things into order. But again, go back through the lecture and isolate those moments where I said, look, think about questions about this particular part. This is really important. Go back to those and think about some questions and bring them to class today. I look forward to talking to each of you. Bye.